esperar ele ligar. Pode. Vamos lá. O pessoal vai entrar? Vai entrar? Não. Talvez pedir para entrar, porque vai sair o barulho.
Você vai usar? Pode ligar na hora da professora ainda.
Tudo bom, Daniel? Então, bom dia, né, a todos os presentes, é uma satisfação. Meu nome é Marilene Proença, sou diretora do Instituto de Psicologia da Universidade de São Paulo, e é uma grande satisfação nós estarmos aqui, né, com os colegas do Instituto de Psicologia, professora Emma Ota, professora Maria Lívia Moreto, professor Daniel Cooperman e a professora convidada Nancy Siegel, que está conosco nesta abertura do segundo encontro de Gêmeos no Instituto de Psicologia. Esse projeto, né, é um projeto que vem acontecendo já há algum tempo e é parte, não é, das atividades do Centro de Pesquisa Aplicada em Bem-Estar e Comportamento Humano, coordenado pela professora Emma Ota. É um projeto inovador, não é, dentro da Universidade de São Paulo, tanto o Centro de Pesquisa quanto também o projeto do Painel dos Gêmeos, né? Então, a Universidade de São Paulo, né, tem trazido, né, para o interior do campo da pesquisa inovações importantes. Nós sempre, quando pensamos em inovação, pensamos nas áreas tecnológicas, né, pensamos nas áreas biológicas, de exatas, né, e não pensamos, muitas vezes, nas áreas de humanas. E nós vemos aqui, né, por meio deste trabalho, por meio do centro, né, do CEPID, do Centro de Pesquisa Aplicada em Bem-Estar e Comportamento Humano, e o Encontro de Gêmeos na USP, como uma forma importante de nós estarmos também inovando nesse campo das ciências humanas, né, das ciências sociais. Então, esse trabalho, né, que está sendo desenvolvido por este grupo, que aqui está, nesta mesa, não é? Ele vai possibilitar, não é, que essa discussão e essa temática possa ser aprofundada. Todos vocês que estão aqui estão interessados nessa temática ou já estão envolvidos com ela de alguma forma, e isso nos deixa muito contentes, porque isso é um processo que está se iniciando, não é? E que, com certeza, o Brasil também terá uma contribuição muito grande nessa área, e a Universidade de São Paulo fará também um papel, e já está fazendo um papel muito importante para a ampliação da pesquisa e do desenvolvimento do conhecimento nesta área. Então, nós temos, né, como convidada a professora Nancy Siegel, que é da California State University, e também diretora do Twin Study Center, então, uma pessoa extremamente importante, né, para o desenvolvimento desse trabalho. Estou aqui com um livro, né, que ela acabou de lançar sobre o tema, falando a respeito dos mitos, né, que ainda existem sobre a situação dos gêmeos no mundo. Então, acho que essa é uma temática muito importante. E também faz parte deste grupo a professora Silvia Corte, que aqui está, né? Quer levantar, professora, para se conhecerem você, né? Que é da Universidade da República de Montevidéu, do Uruguai, que também está participando desse trabalho, está nos visitando. É uma honra também recebê-la, professora. E esse evento, então, conta, não é, com a possibilidade da existência de um painel USP de Gêmeos, que já é uma realidade, né? Está aqui já o banner com os primeiros dados das pessoas que já se cadastraram nesse painel. Ele tem pouco tempo, não é, de existência, mas já tem uma adesão muito interessante de vários estados do Brasil. E agora o processo de divulgação, de ampliação, com certeza esse segundo encontro vai colaborar e muito, não é, para que novas ideias surjam, para se chegar a esses gêmeos, a essas pessoas que estão e que serão interessadas, sem dúvida nenhuma, nessa discussão. E temos também o que se chama de um braço clínico, não é? Desse painel, que está sendo coordenado pela professora Maria Lívia Moreto e pelo professor Daniel Cooperman, que estão aqui na mesa também conosco, e que estão trazendo também essa contribuição dessa perspectiva clínica, não é, para a possibilidade de atender, de compreender e de poder trabalhar, não é, intervenções no campo da psicologia com famílias e com os próprios gêmeos. Então, eu acho que o Instituto, né, está de parabéns por estar dando essa importante contribuição, e as colegas, né, professora Nancy, professora Silvia, os nossos agradecimentos por estarmos aqui. A casa é de vocês, né? Se sintam à vontade. E agradecer a todos vocês que vieram também, que conheceram o Instituto de Psicologia, alguns pela primeira vez, não é? Outros já são assíduos frequentadores, já são alunos, já são estudantes, já são pesquisadores. E agradecer muito, não é, a oportunidade de estar aqui abrindo esse evento e conhecendo um pouco mais deste importante trabalho que o Instituto de Psicologia está oferecendo, não só para o campo da pesquisa, mas para a sociedade de maneira geral. Parabéns e muito obrigada.
Muito obrigada, professora Marilene, né? Eu vou fazer uma pequena fala, né? E eu vou falar em inglês. Vou tentar. Apenas para que seja mais acessível para a professora Nancy, né? Porque nós já fizemos que, na sexta-feira, ela ouvisse muitas palestras em português, né? Ela foi muito gentil, mas vamos tentar que ela acompanhe conosco. Eu fiz eu tenho um pequeno texto em português que, quem precisar, a Tânia, que está aqui presente, pode solicitá-la. De qualquer modo, eu vou falar bem devagar, né? Eu acho que vai ser fácil para todo mundo acompanhar, né? Como? Eu queria pedir o PowerPoint e começarmos, né? Como é que ele não está subindo? Peraí, vocês me ajudam? O nem devia estar subindo? Pela lateral, será? Você coloca lá no primeiro?
Foi lá para cima, né?
É o primeiro que você tem que colocar. Ufa! Muito bem. E agora eu posso descer? Tá bom. Muito bem. Então, ok. Good morning. I want to welcome everyone here today on our second day of activities at the second Twins meeting at the University of São Paulo, this time at the Institute of Psychology, with lectures dealing with behavior and psychological processes. On July 28th, We spent a very pleasant day on the sports center of the University of São Paulo. I want to thank the organization team for the meeting at CEPEUSP. It was a wonderful opportunity to socialize and to share experiences. We have some photographs of the event, and the participants can recognize them. It was very nice and great. We had the whole day of activities with children, with adolescents, with mature adults, people. No? And I would like to express my gratitude to those who remembered family stories, such as Professor Raquel Guzzo, our colleague from Pontifícia Universidade Católica de Campinas, who remembered happy moments of life with her father and uncle, the twin brothers Sérgio Lobo and Dirceu Lobo, affectionately called by the nickname Lobo e Lobolinha. I don't know how to translate this. Lobo and Loboline. I don't know. She conducted a research with parents about the temperament of 26 pairs of 7 to 14 years old twins, 15 monozygotic and 11 dizygotic, using the Pavlovian temperament survey. Maybe the research was motivated by her personal contact with twins in her own family. Thinking about the best ways to structure my opening speech today, I concluded that the best way would be telling you my route into psychology, so you could understand my interest in twin studies, why psychologists should study twins, in my opinion, the importance that I give to USP Twins Panel and USP Twins Census, the importance of the communication with colleagues of our research network and with Professor Maria Lívia Moreto and Professor Daniel Cooperman, who created a clinical branch of the Twins Project at the Institute of Psychology of the University of São Paulo. I began studying psychology at the undergraduate level at the Institute of Psychology in 1970. The course had been created in 1958 at the Faculty of Philosophy, Languages, and Human Sciences. The Psychology Institute was created in 1970. As a student, I became interested in the field of clinical psychology, but I had difficulties with theories immunized from falsification and which blamed mothers for all the psychological problems of adults originating in childhood. The refrigerator mother theory for autism bothered me. As a student, I also became interested in behaviorism because its commitment to scientific rigor. But some premises bothered me, such as the notion of tabula rasa, stating that humans are born with an empty mind, as blank slates, with all knowledge coming from experience. Besides, affective phenomena were relegated to ghosts in the machine. I thought that the baby could be thrown out with the bath water. I found answers to my conceptual concerns in psychoethology. The 4 whys helped me to organize knowledge. The 2 proximal whys of psychology, causation and ontogenesis, were added to 2 distal whys, phylogenetic and functional. I found that interest in human evolution and comparative psychology made sense in the context of psychology and could help to raise questions about causation and ontogenesis. Direct observation of human infants convinced me that humans are born with an innate communicative competence. These observations also convinced me of the temperamental differences in infants and young children. Let me see. I have here some photographs. Ethan is coming to the world, and you can see that he cries a lot, but after 2 minutes he calms down, and he is covered and placed next his mother. Here you can see that he's calming down. The father caresses the infant face. He's looking to his mother. He doesn't seems to like much the intervention of his father. And here you can see that he's communicating. No? He's looking to one, he's looking to the other. He cannot be a blank slate. He has some innate communicative competence, primary intersubjective competence. Here he's also continuing his interaction. He's really very little. He's a newborn. I said that these observations also convinced me of the importance of temperamental differences in infants and young children, and that socialization is a two-way street. Parents know that every child is different from each other. Child rearing is something a parent does to a child. It's not something a parent does to a child. It is something that parent and child do together. This is said by Judith Harris in her book, The Nurture Assumption. Parents adjust their child rearing to the child. Even young babies have an active contribution to the parent-child relationship. I learned about twin studies and the impact they had on nature-nurture debate. These studies raised the possibility that individuals may actively select their environment in ways that are compatible with their temperament and are not merely passive recipients of external environmental experiences. I got especially interested in the Minnesota study of twins reared apart. There were many fascinating life stories to think about, such as Oscar Stohr and Jack Yuffie, who were identical twins, separated when they were 6 months old. Whereas Oscar grew up with his grandmother in Germany as a Catholic and a Nazi, Jack grew up with his father in Trinidad as a Jew. Nancy probably will talk us about many fascinating stories and the science behind the stories, isn't it, Nancy? USP Twins Panel was created by a group of professors at the Institute of Psychology of the University of São Paulo. Our research network includes colleagues from other universities, PUC from São Paulo, University Federal of Pará, Universidade de Brasília, Universidade Estadual de Londrina, California State University in Fullerton, la Universidade de la República, em Montevideo, Uruguai. I want to say that the first PhD thesis on twins at the Institute of Psychology of the University of São Paulo was developed by our colleague from Londrina State University, Professor Maria Elizabeth Tavares. Thank you for coming today. My research team includes now undergraduate and graduate students. We are a multidisciplinary group. Some have more familiarity with behavioral genetics and others don't have. They are more interested in the psychological processes involved in twinship. But I think that this multidisciplinary team is the richness of our team. And Professor Nancy Siegel, research articles and books are very inspiring for us. I gave here some examples that I like so much. The study of tacit coordination, the study of social closeness, the study on competition and cooperation, and how you can integrate the two distal whys, for instance, Hamilton models, to think about and to develop hypotheses. It was really fascinating for me to find this. Here you can see the results of Painel USP de Gêmeos. We are very far away from the 15,000 twins of the international panels and registries. But we are enthusiastic because our 845 members of our panel are a good starting in this panel because we began some months ago. The most comprehensive meta-analysis based on 50 years of research of twins was published in 2015 by Nature, Polderman and her colleagues. And this meta-analysis was based on 2,748 studies. And only 5 studies conducted by Brazilian researchers were included, but no psychological Brazilian research was included. There were studies on medicine, biology, and physical education. So, the study of twins has a potential to be more fully explored by Brazilian psychologists. We have many future research projects. We regard these projects as a two-way road with feedback from twins, twin mothers, and researchers. Let's build knowledge with Brazilian twins and for Brazilian twins. Thank you very much. Você agora? Não, agora não. Now it's Maria Lívia and Daniel, and afterwards you, Nancy. Vocês não vão me dizer. Tá. Daniel, tirar isso enquanto a Maria Lívia fosse falar? Já tirou. Tá bom. Assim, tá bom.
Bom dia a todos e todas. Eu vou ser muito breve, para que a gente não se atrase em nosso programa. Eu quero dar as boas-vindas a todos e dizer que nós estamos muito contentes de realizar o 2º Encontro de Gêmeos na USP que é uma iniciativa importante de pesquisa e um modo importante de compartilhar com vocês e com a sociedade o trabalho que nós estamos desenvolvendo. Quero agradecer a oportunidade que nos foi dada, a mim, ao professor Daniel, à equipe dos professores da psicologia clínica, pela professora Emma, a convite também da professora Nancy, para que coordenemos o braço clínico desse importante projeto, que é uma maneira também de oferecermos um espaço de atendimento, de escuta para os gêmeos e suas famílias, e, dessa maneira, a gente espera conseguir ampliar o conhecimento na área. Então, eu vou passar a palavra para o professor Daniel, não? Para a professora Nancy, para que a gente dê continuidade a essa abertura. Obrigada.
Yes, it's your talk. It's my talk now. Okay, I'm going to get up and...
Então, feita essa introdução geral, nós vamos passar à palestra da professora Nancy Segal.
It's such a pleasure to be here this morning. I'm so grateful to Emma and for all the staff here at the Institute of Psychology and the Brazilian Twin Registry for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be back here again. I was here in February of 2016, and it's nice to see everybody, and it's so familiar. I want to talk today about twins, the science behind the fascination. And I'm going to do this. Yeah, sure. I think I do it. Yeah, it's just this one right here. And I want to do this by going through some fascinating life histories of twins, and then to show how we can use twins as models for understanding so many aspects of human behavioral development. So I'm going to start with this wonderful pair of twins, Victor and Vincent McCusick. You can see them as small children. They're on the left, growing up in their hometown, a rural farm in Maine. And as somewhat older boys, and what you can see is that these identical twins show very, very strikingly similar physical features, and these physical features are stable across the lifespan. Look at the next slide. Here they are as elderly gentlemen, and you can see that, again, they are strikingly similar in appearance, as they are here as well. And here they're even sitting in similar positions with their hands folded in similar ways. Not just coincidence, but their bodies are made the same way, and so they fall into similar and more comfortable positions in synchrony. Now, another interesting thing about the McCusick twins is that they're both very famous and very accomplished in their respective fields. Victor McCusick is the father of medical genetics. He graduated from the Johns Hopkins Medical School. He won the Lasker Award for Special Achievement in Medical Sciences, a prize that is just under the Nobel. He won the National Medal of Science in 2002, the Japanese Prize in Medical Genomics and Genetics in 2008, and he composed the book Mendelian Inheritance in Man in 1966, a volume that catalogs every genetic disease identified. And as more and more get accumulated, and as we identify the genes underlying those diseases, the book has been updated, and fortunately for all of us, it's available on the internet. Now, his twin brother, Vincent McCusick, was a student at MIT in electrical engineering. He was the Harvard Law School president. He was a member of the Harvard Law Review. He clerked for Felix Frankfurter and Leonard Hand. He was a candidate for the Supreme Court Justice of the United States. And he authored a book called Maine Civil Practice in 1959, which is still in use today. So we can ask ourselves, how is it that these twins, so physically similar and so intellectually similar and accomplished, how did two human beings get to be that way? And that is the fascination of twins behind the science. So first, let's begin with talking about the different types of twins. We have identical or monozygotic twins who result when a single fertilized egg divides between the 1st and 14th day after conception, yielding two genetically identical individuals. And we have fraternal twins, or dizygotic twins, who can either be of the same sex or the opposite sex. And they share half their genes in common on average, just like ordinary siblings do. And we're so fortunate to have these two kinds of twins in our population because we have a very simple and elegant way of looking at the complexity of nature and nurture. We simply compare identical twins to fraternal twins with respect to height or intelligence or temperament or well-being. And if the identical twins are more alike, this tells us that the genes do play some role in the development of that trait. And you can see here that these identical twins on your left are much more similar in height than are those fraternal twins over there. This is such an exciting time to be involved in twin research for so many reasons. The twinning rate in Western nations has gone up from 1 in 60 babies to 1 in 30. Astronomical. Why? Because women are delaying the childbearing years in order to complete educations and occupations, and fraternal twinning is linked to being an older mother. And with the advent of in vitro fertilization and other reproductive technologies, we're also seeing a higher rate of both fraternal twins and a less striking but nevertheless increase in identical twins as well. We now know that from a twin study that attractiveness to mosquitoes is partly genetically influenced. Twins have told us that. We know that we can have same-sex monochorionic twins were identified among fraternals. Most fraternals do not have a single chorion or outer fetal membrane, but some rare pairs do. We found out that Benin has the largest natural twinning rate. That used to belong to Nigeria, but recently that has switched. And the rate is almost 30 out of 1,000 babies. Astronomical. We know that Mz twins can now be distinguished based on de novo mutations. And as Emma pointed out, a wonderful study done in 2015 found that the average heritability of most traits is close to 50%. And finally, a study that I just came across before leaving California, just fascinating. It was found that there are strong genetic effects on eye tracking using both typical and atypical infants. So aside from the classic twin comparison, there are many other twin designs. We can look at identical twins who differ in some way as a way of understanding the environmental effects that explain those differences. And we can use that information to help people in the general public. So those identical twins differ in 3 important ways. One in body weight, the other in dental patterns. One has a space between her teeth, the other one does not. And the one on the right has breast cancer, recently passed away. A very sad thing for these twins. And that's a whole other area, bereavement and what that means for twins and their families. We can study twins raised apart from birth. And there's a set of monozygotic triplets who were all placed in separate families as babies who participated in the Minnesota study of twins raised apart. And when you look at monozygotic twins or triplets who have been separated, their degree of resemblance gives you a pure estimate of genetic influence. I have started a study on young Chinese twins raised apart from birth. And this is the only study I'm aware of that looks at twins prospectively. That is, tracking development as the children actually grow up. In the Minnesota study and in the other studies of twins raised apart, we study them as adults. So we have to recreate their childhood influences. But I'm looking at twins beginning at very young ages and tracking them as they develop over time. I now have gathered data on 18 sets of these twins, 14 monozygotic and 8 dizygotic, with a mean age of about 9.5, but they range in age from 3 to 24. And because of a wonderful television program I did a year or so ago, I'm finding more of these cases, so it's a very exciting venture. These twins were adopted at about the age of 1, but some as young as about 3 or 4 months, and others as late as 17 months. This is a pair of twins in that study that I recently was able to visit in Norway last month when I went to Oslo for the Behavior Genetics Association. I met them for the first time in 2009 when they were 6. That's taken just shortly after their very first reunion. And when I was in Norway, I positioned them in exactly the same way as when they were 6 and took their picture again. And you can just see how they've changed in very, very similar ways. In fact, there's a wonderful movie made about them called Twin Sisters, which I think you can download from Netflix. This is a study that was actually the very first in my career. It was for my doctoral dissertation, but I loved it and I still love it. And it's guided my thinking in so many ways. It doesn't really have a name, but I've called it twins as couples, because here I'm not interested in how similar is twin A to twin B. I'm interested in the social interactional processes and outcomes that we observe when twins interact with one another. And so what I did was to go all through the Chicago area and bring the twins a puzzle with the instruction, solve the puzzle together. And what I saw was that the identical twins solved it in a very interactive way. It was a pleasant experience, they smiled, they got along beautifully, and they solved the puzzle quickly. Whereas the fraternal twins over on your right were seated far apart, and they each took a piece of the puzzle to their side, and it was kind of a messy, disorganized interaction. And while they solved the puzzle, it wasn't done as quickly or as competently as the identicals. And now with Tanya's help, I'm going to show you a very short clip of identical and fraternal twins working on the puzzle. There is no sound because I wanted to get a sense mostly of their facial expressions and their body movements. So just watch their hands, watch their faces, watch their bodies. These are identical twins, of course. And now you see a pair of fraternal twins. Watch the difference. That was about the most cooperative thing they did. Okay, I think we'll stop it now. Okay. No. That's it. Okay, perfect. Yeah. Thank you. So what you just saw actually was the different outcomes you see when identical genotypes cooperate, fraternal genotypes compete. So another way to look at twins, which I've done on many occasions, and I'll give you some examples of this later on in the lecture, are monozygotic twin families. And here what you see are identical twins, twin 1 and twin 2, females, who marry unrelated individuals, and they have children. So they're just doing what comes naturally. But because they're twins, we get some very fascinating family configurations. Because the children of these two couples are not just cousins, they're half-siblings because they share a genetically identical parent in common. And each twin becomes not just the aunt of her nieces and nephews, but becomes the genetic mother, because she could have had them just as easily as the other one. And we can compare the similarities within these families and the social relationships to those of fraternal twins, who are really the ordinary mother, father, aunt, uncle twin relationships that you see. Case studies are very informative and give you wonderful ideas about how you can apply the outcomes in larger, more systematic studies. I'm a great believer in case studies. I know that you cannot generalize beyond them, but you get wonderful ideas from them. And this was actually a groundbreaking case in the United States in the 1960s, because it came at a time when there was very much an environmentalist perspective in America and in many places. And when people studied schizophrenia or autism, it was blamed on the mother. So this case came at a time that really challenged that kind of thinking, really injecting a genetic perspective into the discussion. These were identical quadruplets born naturally, the Jeanine Quadruples. Jeanine was not their real name, it was a name given to them to preserve their identity. But Jeanine was a good choice because in Greek it means dire birth or dreadful gene. And these girls, named Nora, Iris, Myra, and Hester, after National Institute of Mental Health, where they were studied, right? Those are not their real names. I know their real names, I'm not going to tell you. But they were all concordant for schizophrenia, although they had it for different degrees, different symptoms. So they were fascinating in that respect. All schizophrenic, but different symptom pictures. And there's a wonderful book authored by David Rosenthal, who was the senior investigator on that team. If you're interested in this area, it's a marvelous read. Another way to study twins or twin-like creations are what I call virtual twins. And I wish I had thought of these myself, but I didn't. They came to me from a mother. Mothers are wonderful. Mothers have wonderful ideas and observations, and we have two of them here today. A mother said to me, Dr. Siegel, I think you'd really be interested in my children. And she said, I had a little boy who passed away, and I was desperate to have another child. So while I tried to get pregnant, I also tried to adopt. And she said, I finally got pregnant, I had a little boy, and 5 days later, a little boy was available for adoption. So here we had children raised together from birth, so closely matched in age, but not genetically related. And I thought, what a wonderful way of getting a handle on direct estimates of environmental effects. So I began to study them, never thinking there were that many out there. But there are. I now have 160 in my study. And here is one wonderful family where the mother conceived fraternal triplets through in vitro fertilization. But she had a little adopted daughter who was 5 months older than the triplets. So by comparing the adopted child with each one of those triplets, I then get 3 sets of virtual twin pairs from one family. And the last kinship, not really a kinship, it's a relationship, that I've become fascinated with in recent years are unrelated lookalikes. And these are not twins. These are unrelated people who happen to look a lot alike. And they're of great interest to me for a number of reasons, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. But they're just another addition to this wonderful array of genetically environmental couples. So what I want to do now is talk a little bit about some common misconceptions, what I call mythconceptions, false beliefs and fables about twins. Some of these are drawn from my recent book, Twin Mythconceptions. Emma has a copy of this here, and I brought flyers with me so you can take a closer look, and if you're interested, get a copy of your own. But it has occurred to me that there's so much misinformation out there, and I really wanted to set the record straight. So we'll look at a couple of these here. So one myth is that identical twins always have one placenta. Many physicians, even today, will tell parents that you have an identical pair because there is one placenta, and then the parents are baffled because the twins grow up looking so different. But in point of fact, you can have identical twins with one placenta if they divide late. So let's take a look at the different stages. Over on the left, you have dichorionic and diamniotic twins with separate placenta. The placentas are those pink structures at the top, so they're separate. The chorion is the outer fetal membrane, and the amnion is the inner one. Most fraternal or dizygotic twins look like this, and 1/3 of identical twins look like this, those that we believe split quite early. So if I'm just looking at this, I couldn't tell the twin type. In the second picture, what you see are twins with 2 chorions and 2 amnions, but a fused placenta. So the placenta has grown together, and that's clear from that little T structure at the top. A little bit difficult to see for you in the back, but it's a kind of a dark red structure. These can be either identical or fraternal twins. From just looking at that, you couldn't tell. Oh, thank you. Yeah, there's that little T structure right there at the top. In the third picture, what you see are monochorionic twins. So they have a single outer membrane, but they have separate amnions. This is a single placenta, and these would be monozygotic twins. And in the last one, a very, very rare type of twin, identical twins with a single chorion and a single amnion and 1 placenta. This represents about 1% of identical twins. So when it comes to placentation, again, 1/3 of Mz twins are dichorionic and diamniotic, but about 2/3 are monochorionic and diamniotic, with 1% being monochorionic and monoamniotic. With dizygotic twins, most are dichorionic and diamniotic, but there are rare exceptions in which the twins share their chorion, and there have been about 20 cases documented so far. And then when it comes to the fused placenta that you saw in the second picture, roughly 50% of Mz twins and 49% of DZ twins fall into this category. So you can see that diagnosing twin type on this basis is just not helpful. And again, the myth of identical twins always having 1 placenta cannot be believed. Another myth is that monozygotic or identical twins do not run in families. That's the myth. Look at this family. Identical twins, each of whom had an identical set of twins. In addition to that, there is some scientific evidence for genetic effects on Mz twinning, but it does not affect all families. So what we believe is that for monozygotic twinning, it tends to be rather random for the most part, but within some families there may be a genetic effect. A Swedish study done in 1996 found a very high incidence of twins among the mothers who were Mz twins themselves. The only trouble with that study was that they had to estimate the twin type of the children, but it was nevertheless consistent with Weinberg's law. You also have isolated communities in India and in Jordan where you have very, very high percentages of monozygotic twins within one family across generations living in these very close-knit neighborhoods. And just July 28th, a few days ago, at the Twins Festival, we came across a set of Mz twins who had 24 sets of twins in 5 generations. And I sat there with them, with Gabby's help, for an hour and a half while one twin was on the phone with her grandmother, and we composed a genogram with all of those twins. Just remarkable. And I hope that somebody from this university can go down there and study them. By the way, in case you're wondering, the monozygotic twinning rate is about 0.3% worldwide. Another myth is that identical twins share 100% of their genes. I've already told you that they share all their genes splitting from a single fertilized egg, but that's not strictly the case. There can be somatic mutations, just spontaneous mutations that happen after birth to one or both twins. You can have paradominant inheritance. This is when genes are passed down through families but are unexpressed and for some reason suddenly become expressed. So while these identical twins would both have the same genes, one might express it, the other one might not. And you can have copy number variations where in DNA replication, certain factors get replicated in one, but not in the other. And then when it comes to different gene expression, you can have genomic imprinting, where how a gene gets expressed depends on whether it is transmitted from the father or the mother. It's exactly the same at the molecular level, but something about which parent transmits it can create a difference. And where this is interesting when it comes to twins is that sometimes genomic imprinting does not happen faithfully and can lead to different diseases in twins. And in fact, some people believe that there is a link between some diseases linked to genomic imprinting and the twinning process itself. Differential X inactivation is very interesting when it comes to females, because as you know, females always carry 2 X chromosomes and males carry an X and a Y. But in females, very early on, 1 X becomes inactivated in every single cell. And if there is an uneven or a skewed X inactivation for an X-linked trait, females may be different. Female identical twins may differ in color blindness, for example, or in X-linked blood groups, or in X-linked diseases such as Fragile X. And of course, with epigenetics, a very, very hot field now, and where twins are playing a great role. How is it that 2 twins with the same genes express them differently? How is it that one twin has muscular dystrophy and the other one doesn't? Or multiple sclerosis and the other one doesn't? Something about the environment may trigger this. The addition of a methyl group to a gene may affect this. These are all interesting issues that are of great interest to researchers that will help us to understand behavior and medical conditions in the general population. So here's another unbelievable myth that some people believe that zygosity testing is not recommended. Some people feel that it would be harmful to twins and their families to know the twin type. I think that is really misguided thinking for these reasons. First of all, parents need to understand the developmental milestones of their children. If one child develops a certain condition or shows advanced cognitive skill or starts to walk before the other one, and the differences are extreme, this means something very different if they're identical or fraternal. If they're fraternal, this might just be their different developmental trajectories, but if they're identical, it could signal some problem with the twin who was behind the other one. So I think for those reasons, this is essential knowledge. Predicting medical issues, of course, and also if twins need a transplant for some reason, you need to know the twin type. for identity formation and self-esteem. The most common question the twins are always asked is, what kind of twin are you? And sometimes they're at a loss for that. And parents are often asked what kind of twins you have, and sometimes parents are at a loss for that. And the other interesting thing is that sometimes twins believe they're identical because they're so similar, and yet they've been told they're fraternal, and so they're confused about who they are and how they got that way. And so this is, again, information that I think needs to be told to parents and to twins, just to achieve peace of mind. Another thing I know is that when parents go out together and are asked what kind of twins they have, there are long discussions involved, and parents who are not twins, who are present, might get really bored. So if parents know what kind of twin they have, this is for everybody's good. Another misconception is that twins communicate telepathically. I'm so glad you're all laughing. This is the most common question I get from journalists, and whenever I tell them that twins do not communicate telepathically, that's usually the end of the conversation. They're bored. They want to speak to somebody who believes it. So here's the evidence against Mz twin telepathy. First of all, when we give twins general intelligence tests, the correlations are very, very high, between 0.75 and 0.86. They think a lot alike, they process information a lot alike. Special mental skills like verbal ability, spatial skills, mental rotations, very, very high degree of genetic similarity. Information processing skills, when you look at a computer and have to match figures or imagine what something looks like from another perspective. Twins are highly matched in that skill. Personality, whether they're traditional, whether they're sociable or extroverted or introverted, about 50% genetically affected. Interests, whether they're interested in sports or athletics or computer programming, again, very high genetic effect. And religiosity, not affiliation, but the extent to which religion is important in their lives, to which they're committed or feel spiritual. Again, so we have all these better scientifically grounded explanations for why twins might give the appearance of telepathy. Maybe ESP-like events, but it's that they are so very much alike. And I should tell you that over the years, I have dealt with professors and attorneys who have cases involving twins who believe they cheated because they came up with such similar exam responses. And so I bring in this evidence to try to convince them that no, it's not telepathy that account for their similar scores. Another myth is that Mz twins are attracted to the same types of spouses. And we saw some twins at the festival who were married, and I questioned them, and I was fascinated by the fact that they just could not have married the other twin. And for someone who's not an identical twin, this poses kind of a dilemma, because aren't they pretty similar? What does the research tell us? The research tells us that only 13% of identical twins' husbands could have fallen for their partner's twin. Only 7% of identical twin wives could have fallen for their partner's twin. So maybe females are a little more picky. But the research is a little bit mixed, with some studies showing that the spouses are pretty similar and most of it showing that they're pretty different. I have interviewed identical twins married to identical twins. And with the question of why are you married to this one and not that one? And I've learned that very subtle differences in personality and appearance make huge differences in which spouse they're attracted to, even when they meet them at exactly the same time. So I think that by studying these kinds of couples, we can learn a lot about mate attraction and mate choice in the non-twin population. Another idea that I try to put to rest in the book is that clones are not identical twins. That's the myth. identical twins are clones by definition because they're genetically identical organisms. But the reverse is not true. We do have two different types of clones. We have natural clones and artificial ones. Natural cloning happening among some plants, like the water hyacinth. And then we have artificial cloning, which happens in a laboratory. You remember Dolly the lamb from 1997, who was cloned, right, after over 200 tries. So why is it that twins are clones, but clones are not twins? I've thought a lot about this as I was asked to write a paper when Dolly was first born. So one thing is that twins are conceived at the same time, but donors and cloned children would be conceived years apart. So the unique aspect of twinship is not replicated in the donor-clone relationship. But there are some exceptional twin cases, like the higher order multiples, the triplets or the quads. They're conceived close in time, but not exactly the same time if you consider that the splits happen somewhat apart. And then there are two processes called superfetation and superfecundation. Now those only apply to fraternal twins, but they refer to twins that are conceived at different times. With superfecundation, that is when a woman releases two eggs at the same time, and they're separately fertilized by the father, but at different times, and sometimes even by different men, if she's a fairly promiscuous type. We have had twins that have different fathers, and they're very, very fascinating cases. And with superfetation, this is an unusual process where a mother releases one egg that is fertilized, and then another egg is released during which would have been the second menstrual cycle, something that's not supposed to happen, but it can happen on rare occasion. So she conceives fraternal twins a month apart. And while they typically have the same birthday, they're born at very different developmental stages. Another difference between twins and clones is that twins share their parents, whereas donors and cloned children share their parents in a biological sense, but not in a technical sense. So in other words, because the cloned child is genetically identical to its mother or its father, it could have been conceived by the grandparents, right? So biologically, it makes sense, but technically those grandparents, who are the parents of the parent, did not conceive that child. There are some exceptions in non-twin cases. You can have a situation where a mother or a prospective mother wants to have a cloned child, and so her egg is given to a surrogate, but the DNA is not the same. Rather, the DNA is the same, but the mitochondrial DNA on the surface belongs to the surrogate who carries it. So there would not be a genetic identity between this mother and the cloned child. Another difference between twins and clones is that twins have the same intrauterine environment, sharing many but not all prenatal events, whereas donors and clones would not share intrauterine environments or prenatal events. And there are exceptional twin cases, however, when twins have different positioning. This in some ways means that their prenatal environments are somewhat different. And in some cases, there is different access to nutrition if the placenta is not fully attached. And time of birth. The longest interval in birth between twins is 87 days, which means that one child is born rather prematurely and the other one is not, so has a very different prenatal situation than the co-twin. And the final difference between twins and clones is that twins are born at the same time, sharing generational and historical events, whereas a donor and a clone would be born at different times. so their historical and generational events would differ. Now, there are some exceptional cases with twins. Twins raised apart, of course, are in the same generation, but there are some who are raised in very different cultures and different countries, so that even the same historical event might be quite different for them. And then you also have time of delivery, which I mentioned earlier. And this can lead to some very interesting differences in twins. There was a pair in England born on different sides of the same month. So one born in, I believe, August and one in September. And in that British school system, if you weren't born by a special date, you wouldn't go to school for another year. So these twins were going to be put into different school grades because of this one-day difference, right? And so the parents had to go to the school and really battle for the children. But that's just an extreme example of how a difference in between twins and clones could make a difference in their experience in life. I want to turn now to some research studies I've done at California State University, Fullerton, and talk about some of these. These have mostly been done, or at least continued, after my last visit here to Brazil in 2016. So I'll talk about a twin family study of social closeness. I'll talk about a study of twinning rates in Sao Paulo. I'll talk about a case study of transsexualism, personality similarity in unrelated lookalikes, and breast milk quality in DZ opposite-sex co-twins. Okay, so they're all very unrelated studies, except that they all have to do with twins. So this is a study that asks the question, does genetic relatedness affect social closeness toward nieces and nephews? And this is an update based on the twin family constellation I showed you a little bit earlier. And here's an actual family that was in the study. Here you see two identical twins who each married unrelated individuals, though these guys happened to be best friends in high school. And they had this little boy, and they had these two girls. She is the genetic mother, as well as the aunt of this little boy, and she's the genetic mother, as well as the aunt of these two girls. And these two girls and this little boy are first cousins, but also genetically half-siblings. So what this study combines is genetic methodology, twin studies, and an evolutionary perspective. And the evolutionary perspective comes from the work of Hamilton, the idea that we feel closer and more altruistic towards individuals with whom we share higher degrees of genetic relatedness. And so my hypothesis was that the identical twin aunts and uncles would feel closer to their nieces and nephews than would the fraternal twin aunts and uncles. And this is now a very big study available on the internet, so if you know any more families, I'm always taking new cases. So how do we define social closeness? As attachment of an individual to another, as caring for an individual by another, and enjoyment of a relationship with another. So again, my hypotheses are that Mz twins will express greater closeness toward their co-twins children than will dizygotic twins. And the twins with female co-twins will express greater closeness toward their co-twins children than will twins with male co-twins. So where does this second hypothesis come from? If you think about the evolutionary concept of paternity uncertainty, men can never be sure that the child of their partner is truly theirs because of hidden ovulation and continuous female receptivity. So if you think about that with twins, if I'm a female co-twin, I know that my female twin sister has a child, that child is related to me. But if I'm a male with a male co-twin, I can never be sure that the child that my twin had is really related to me, right? So that's why I'm expecting that twins with female co-twins will feel closer to their nieces and nephews than will twins with male co-twins. So here are the descriptive characteristics for the twin sample. And we have 362 Mz twins and 108 DZ twins. Very few males are relative to the females. For any of you who've done twin research, you'll know this is a very, very typical finding. There is a law that my colleague David Licken came up with called the rule of 2/3. What does that mean? It means that when you do a volunteer twin sample, you're going to get 2/3 monozygotic twins and 2/3 females. Monozygotic twins are more interested in being twins than fraternal twins, more likely to be interested in science and participating and just finding out about themselves and their similarities. And females are more likely to volunteer for twin research anyway. But I can tell you that when you work with twins, and I'm sure some of you are finding this, twins are a unique population. They will come to you. They will volunteer. They will seek you out for research participation. I'm amazed by this, but it's so true. Sir Francis Galton, the father of the twin method, wrote about this. He would send out inquiries, but twins would come to him with their wonderful stories. And many of my colleagues who do non-twin research have to work very hard to get samples for their projects. And I feel so fortunate because I just have this surplus of people to work with, and such delightful people too. So the mean age of the Mz twins is 43, for the dizygotic twins 42, so very, very well matched. Did not differ significantly between twin groups. We get personal data from the twins on the internet, their age, their gender, and their birth order. We do the zygosity determination through a standard physical resemblance questionnaire. And we ask them to list their own children and their co-twins' children, the sexes and the ages. But we also ask them to indicate whether or not the child is biological or adopted, because we only do the study with the biological children. Here are some sample questions from the protocol. So, I like being with this child. Very true, somewhat true, untrue. This child looks like he or she could have been my child. I generally think of this child as my own. And then we compute a composite score based on the sum of 12 items, so you can get a score of 12 through 36. And we did a factor analysis that yielded 3 factors: comparative closeness, perceived closeness, and perceived similarity. So here's the first set of results. Now keep in mind that a lower score is greater closeness. A higher score means that you're less close, okay? So we found that the Mz twins, that is the Mz twin aunts and uncles, feel closer to their nieces and nephews than do the DZ twins, okay? Because the DZ twins have the higher scores. And similarly, the female twins feel closer to their nieces and nephews than do the male twins. When we did the factor analysis, I said we yielded 3 scores, so here are some definitions. Comparative closeness refers to your own closeness versus your co-twin's closeness to the niece and nephew. So am I equally close to the child as my twin brother or sister? Perceived closeness, closeness to or liking of the niece or nephew. And perceived similarity, the physical or behavioral similarity between the twin aunt and uncle and the niece or nephew. And we found that for twin type, the Mz twins are higher on all of these, and the DZ twins are lower. and females, as expected, score higher on these as well. When we did the step-down analysis, we got a somewhat different picture. For twin type, perceived closeness was significant, as we expected. Comparative closeness is in the right direction, but not quite there, perhaps because it's a more indirect measure. And when we controlled for both of those, perceived similarity was significant. For co-twin sex effects, we found the perceived closeness was in the right direction, but not quite there. But both comparative closeness and perceived similarity were significant, so that for females, these were all higher than males. So in summary, we found that Mz twin aunts and uncles express greater social closeness toward nieces and nephews than dizygotic twin aunts and uncles. And the twins with female co-twins express greater social closeness toward nieces and nephews than twins with male co-twins. Now, another feature of this study was gift giving. And there have been a number of studies in the evolutionary literature that show that gift giving is not the same among family members, that people tend to give better gifts and more frequent gifts to closer relatives. So I expected to see this in my study, that Mz twins would give more gifts and more expensive gifts to nieces and nephews, and the twins with female co-twins would give more gifts and more expensive gifts to their nieces and nephews than twins with male co-twins. So we asked them to, here it just the hypothesis again. So we asked them to simply list the number of gifts they gave and what they spent for them. Okay, so how many gifts on average do you give to your child, or give to this child, and how much money on average do you spend on each gift? So here the results were a little bit disappointing. We found that while Mz twins gave more gifts than DZ twins, it was not a significant effect. And this is replicated because we ask for one child and then another child of the co-twin. The cost per gift also didn't really vary. Here, actually, DZ twins spent a little bit more than the Mz twins. So it may be that there are sort of standard, typical gift-giving amounts that people follow. When it came to gifts by co-twin sex, here we found significant effects where females give more gifts than, rather, if your twin is a female, you give more gifts to the niece or nephew than if your twin is a male. And that was replicated for both child 1 and child 2. But cost per gift, while in the right direction, was not significant. So, findings for gift giving were not supported, except for the fact that twins with female co-twins did give a greater number of gifts to nieces and nephews than twins with male co-twins. And the last one was not supported. Now, before I get to the twinning rates in Sao Paulo, let me just ask if anybody has any questions at this point, because I know this is a kind of a long lecture and maybe some audience participation would be helpful. So does anybody have any questions or comments, either the students or the professors or the mothers? Yes, Nara.
First, I want to thank you for coming, and thanks all the staff that did this lecture and the seminar. I was amazing, interesting about your last study about social relation and closeness, and I was thinking, it can be clear to me, because female usually demonstrates more affect than male, and do you control in your statistic measure the sex to think that male, that the two double conditions, monozygotic and dizygotic, will be different. Did you understand me? More or less.
I think I understand you. You're asking because females tend to be more
Close.
giving and closer. Do I control for this? But this is what I'm studying.
Yes, yes, I understood. But when you test the twin monozygotic and dizygotic, did you control for sex when you compare this?
Well, in the one comparison, we were comparing the males and the females. But you're asking within the MZ-DC comparison, we didn't control for that, no. I will say, though, that the majority of the twins were female. That is one problem in the study, as I pointed out. It would be interesting, I think, to control for gender, and I would like to do that in future studies. Yeah. Any more questions before we go on? Comments? Okay. Well, there'll be a chance at the end of this, too. So when I was here the last time, working with Emma and the other twin researchers here at the University of Sao Paulo, there was access to a very extensive database of twinning rates here in Sao Paulo, very complete, very rich. And we worked on that very hard and have a paper that was published in Twin Research in Human Genetics. Twin Research in Human Genetics is the flagship journal of the International Society for Twin Studies. And so we found some key findings, many findings in the paper actually, but two of the most interesting ones for me was the dizygotic twinning was strongly predicted by maternal age, which, as I said earlier, when women get older, they tend to release two eggs at the same time, which increases the possibility of fraternal twinning. And another finding was that historical time period was linked to twinning rates, but not to singleton or the higher order multiple birth rates. So as time went on over the years, we were seeing an increase in twinning rates. And I think that's probably linked in part to the older mother effect and to the advent of reproductive technologies. So I never really was one who studied gender identity or transsexualism, but these studies came to me because of my background in twin research. And I did a very interesting case study in conjunction with Dr. Milton Diamond, who is famous in this area at the University of Hawaii. We published the first case of transsexualism in a concordant male-to-female monozygotic reared apart twin pair. Okay, so you have to think of the rarity of this. Monozygotic twinning is fairly rare. Male monozygotic twinning is another subset of that. And then to have a set of twins raised apart from birth is even more rare. So this gives us a real handle into the extent to which gender identity can be genetically influenced. So this is the first pair of transsexualism in a concordant pair, or in any reared apart pair, I should say. These twins were separated since birth. One of the twins was raised with his biological mother, but because the mother was so very sick at birth, the hospital advised her to give the other child away. Unfortunately, one of the twins committed suicide at the age of 35, so my information is based largely on the twin who was still the survivor, who was in touch with that twin after some time. So these interviews are based in 2012, 2013 with the living co-twin, and their monozygosity was confirmed by a DNA test done prior to my association with them, and also confirmed by a physical resemblance questionnaire. And here are the twins as children. You can see how remarkably similar they look. LT stands for living twin, and AT stands for adopted twin. I was unable to get adult pictures of them for privacy reasons, but the twin who's alive was willing to give me these, and these are actually published in the paper. So definitions and prevalence from the DSM-5. Transsexualism is defined as persistent cross-gender identification with a strong desire to change sexual characteristics to those of the other gender. Statistics for prevalence, male to female is more common, a ratio of 1 in 11,000 to 1 in 45,000, whereas female to male are 1 in 30,000 to 1 in 200,000. Interesting that the first two pairs I ever studied, though, were female to male. That's another set of case reports. So here are the transition timelines for those twins. So I've listed it as the event, living twin, adopted twin. So a diagnosis of hypospadias, this is a malfunction of the urinary tract where the penis does not properly urinate. It comes out sort of on the side rather than in the front. So that was in one of the twins. We don't know about the diseased twin. Feelings of gender dysphoria at about the same time for both children, as young as 8 through 10. Independent cross-dressing at the same time. Independent desire to transition. 14 for the living twin. We don't know when it happened for the other one. Mother consults about sex reassignment surgery at 14 here. Here we don't know, and in fact, it was interesting that for the living twin, the family was very supportive of that child's gender identity. Whereas in the other family, it was severely punished, not supported at all. Knowledge of twinship was at 15 for the living twin. We don't know when it was for the adopted twin, but their first meeting was at 15 and a half. So you see, by then, all this had already taken place. Another set of transition timelines, age and years at first occurrence. Both twins at age 17 had independent depilatation treatment, hair removal. Now, they had an uncle who had transitioned, a much older uncle that they really didn't know anything about, had never had contact with, but they learned about him when they were 18. They started living openly as females at about the same age. Hormone treatment, somewhat earlier for here. Electrolysis, 37, uncertain here. Independent breast augmentation, so he had it at 23, this one at 39, and genital reconstruction. So with a case study, what we wanted to do, and what I think is useful whenever a case study is done, is to try to set it within the context of the published literature. And again, I'll turn to my colleague, Dr. Milton Diamond, who was the expert in this, who published the best, most complete study I have ever seen on the rates of concordance for transsexualism in monozygotic and dizygotic twins. And so if we look at the MZ males, about 33% are concordant, 22% female, and look at these results for the dizygotic twins, almost nothing. And another study done with some twins, although fewer in number, exactly the same findings for MZ male and female twins, dizygotic of 0, and overall about the same figures. So while it's not perfect similarity, there does seem to be a genetic component to gender identity. Some researchers have looked at children. Ariel Nafo in Israel and Robert Plomin have looked at these and found genetic effects on children as well. But I do think that the case of the reared apart twins, though, is particularly striking. Not just because I've done it, but because I think it's striking no matter who would have done it. So in summary conclusions, the present case does not prove the role of genes regarding gender identity and transsexualism, but it is consistent with genetic findings. 2 other MZA twin pairs have transitioned independently. My colleague Dr. Diamond knows these pairs, but they're difficult to get access to, and it's not all that certain that they want to be in research. In a 3rd case, MZA male twins had both engaged in cross-dressing unbeknownst to one another until they were in their 30s. And 1 twin has since transitioned to being female. The present case highlights possible contributions from rearing factors in fashioning the co-twins' contrasting responses and coping strategies. And I think this case, most importantly, defines a domain in which it's possible to search for underlying mechanisms. So many times parents have been blamed, rearing of, causing the transsexualism, but we know that while parents may respond to these children in certain ways that are different from their other children, it's the children evoking these responses from the parents, not the parents treating the children a certain way that causes this sort of thing. Parents might magnify or reinforce by their treatment, but ultimately it's the children who are expressing the behaviors that the parents react to. I mean, you have to ask yourself, why would a parent suddenly respond one way to one twin, not the other, in a way that would affect gender identity unless the child was reacting that way? So here I want to change tracks a little bit and talk about the pairs of genetically unrelated lookalikes, further tests of personality resemblance and social affiliation. And I've done these in conjunction with some of my best graduate students, Brittany Hernandez and Jamie Graham. The study is still ongoing, but there have been 2 previous publications in the journal Personality and Individual Differences. And if any of you know any real good lookalikes, you let me know, because I really need to increase the sample. So, why study these particular pairs? There's a frequent criticism in the twin research world by our critics that MZ co-twins' personality similarity comes from their similar treatment by others due to their physical resemblance. In other words, people treat MZ twins alike based on how they look. Okay, that's the criticism. So how do you address that criticism? A great way to address it is to use unrelated lookalikes, because the unrelated lookalikes parallel MZA twins because of their matched appearance, but they don't have a genetic link. So what's the rationale for this? If physical appearance triggers a certain class of treatment by others, then the personality similarity of unrelated lookalikes should be similar to that of MZ twins, or at least DZ twins, if it's just physical resemblance. However, if shared genes underlie MZ co-twins' matched behaviors, then unrelated lookalikes should show little or no resemblance in personality or in self-esteem. Okay, I hope I'm being clear. I hope you're all following this. I know it can be a little bit tricky. But if anyone has a question now, I'm happy to clarify. But if not, we'll go on and you can save it till the end. So how did I find these people? They're pretty unusual. There is a photographer in Canada named Francois Brunel, and his hobby is to take photographs of unrelated lookalikes. And he came upon this hobby because he is one himself. He has a wonderful website called I'm Not a Lookalike. And he has on his website photographs posted of the people he's taken pictures of. One day, one of my students showed me this website, and immediately I started thinking, I can use these twins or these couples to address that criticism. So in addition to his sample, I was able to get some cases of my own through personal referrals, and the British television, because they did a program last year on these cases, they were able to give me 8 new pairs. So we used some inventories and questionnaires. Now, because Francois Brunel is from Montreal, Canada, and his participants were French speaking, I had to get a French personality questionnaire. So for that, I turned to some colleagues in France who gave me the Questionnaire de Personnalité au Travail, which stands for personality of working people. But it worked out just fine because it gives you scores on the big 5 personality factors of openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. I used the Rosenberg self-esteem scale, which has been translated into so many different languages, and it's also very short, so that was good. I used the NEO, the 5 personality questionnaire composed by Costa and McRae. And I then was very interested, too, in the social relationships of these individuals. You know, monozygotic twins, whether raised apart or together, form very close relations with one another. The monozygotic twins, I mean, even raised apart, do come together with an excellent rapport. So you have to ask yourself, would these unrelateds form the same thing? So I gave them the same social relationship inventory that I give to my reared apart twins. So now the participant sample has 45 sets. Here, about 50% are female. Their mean age is 42, but they range from 16 to 84. And the age difference between them is on average 6, although some pairs differ by 0, and some differ by as much as 25 years. So here are the results from part 1. Correlations between age and sex and the personality questionnaire, the first one, and the self-esteem scale. Basically, not much here at all. There is a significant correlation between emotional stability and sex, with females showing higher scores. Females showing lower scores. No, let me think a second. Females showing lower scores in emotional stability, but females showing higher scores in conscientiousness. For self-esteem, older individuals have higher self-esteem. A larger age difference is linked to higher self-esteem, and females higher self-esteem. Now here's where the really interesting data are found. This shows you the correlations, the intra-class correlations, for the unrelated lookalikes compared with monozygotic twins raised apart and together, and dizygotic twins raised apart and together. I've bolded the unrelated lookalike ones because they're so striking. And this is based on the first personality questionnaire, the one that was originally in French, but fortunately there's an English version, so everybody could do it. You can see that based on 37 pairs for whom we had data, the correlations are virtually negligible. Some of them are negative. The highest one is 0.13, which is not significant. But take a look at 113 MZA twin pairs. Look at the size of those in comparison to these. Monozygotic twins raised together, hovering on about 0.5. Dizygotic twins raised apart are lower than the monozygotics, but certainly, basically, mostly higher than the unrelateds are the dizygotic twins raised together. So that shows, I think, in a very clear way that the personality similarity is just negligible in these unrelated lookalikes, and that if monozygotic twins are alike in personality, it's because of their shared genes. Now, we have to look at the replication with, let's see, this is the Rosenberg. So this is now self-esteem, and I was able to get a number of twin groups who have completed this one. Self-esteem has a lower genetic effect than does personality, but nevertheless, those are modest correlations, but for the unrelated lookalikes, minus 0.18. So very, very different. So again, the idea of genetics underlying self-esteem, I think, is demonstrated here as well. Here is a very interesting and not replicable finding. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself. These are the correlations between age and sex and the NEO, personality inventory. Here we find that older individuals are lower in neuroticism. Females were higher than males. And for openness, older individuals were more open. The age difference between them was linked to greater differences in openness. And larger differences in age led to smaller differences in agreeableness, which was interesting. And older individuals were higher in conscientiousness. Okay, here is where I found my one non-replicable finding. So what did replicate in two different personality surveys was the lack of resemblance in stability, extroversion, agreeableness, and conscientiousness. You can see, I guess the light doesn't show on that one, but minus 0.07, minus 0.09, extroversion, very low, agreeableness, and conscientiousness. The difference is openness. The correlation is minus 0.08 for the first personality's inventory, but it was 0.41 for the second one. So that shows that the unrelated lookalikes on the NEO were very similar in openness. I don't put much in that finding, however, because it is still a very small sample of just, 42 pairs, and also because it did not replicate. It was inconsistent with the other one and inconsistent with everything else we've seen in the literature. So it's still something to watch out for. The only thing that someone suggested to me that might explain it is that the 8 pairs I added from the British television show might have been fairly open in the sense that they didn't mind being on television, didn't mind being studied. So that's one possibility, but it's something I'm going to watch for. At any rate, it didn't replicate, and it's inconsistent with the rest of the literature, so I'm not too worried about it. Okay, so the unrelated lookalikes show little resemblance in the big 5 personality traits as well as in self-esteem, with the one exception on the NEO. It appears that Mz co-twins' personality similarity mostly reflects their shared genes. Reactive gene-environment correlation, that is the idea that we react towards people based on their innate tendencies, would seem to best explain Mz co-twin similar treatment by others. In the second part of that study, I was interested in the social relatedness. And I've adapted some questions from the inventory that I gave to the rear-to-part twins. So the first question, when I met my unrelated lookalike for the first time, I felt we would become closer than best friends, as close as best friends, less close as best friends, on down to less close than most people I meet for the first time. And this is repeated for feelings of familiarity, as well as in the current time frame, and for any adopted siblings. So what I'm addressing is the question, do people who look alike feel socially closer to one another? Well, the answer is that they don't. So if you look at that first set of bars, how did you feel when you first met? Only about 17% felt very close, but most of them felt somewhat close or not close at all. And if you look at the change from initial closeness to current closeness, you see that the biggest change was in those second bars, with most twins, or most individuals now feeling not close at all. And in the initial familiarity, most felt only somewhat familiar or not familiar at all, and that basically stayed the same as they got to know one another. Now we're going to take a look at the monozygotic twins raised apart. So here you can see a very, very, very different picture with initial and current closeness being very, very high and actually going up a bit. And with familiarity again, very, very high in the beginning and going up over time as they got to know one another. And with the dizygotic twins raised apart, you can see that while they did not feel as initially close as the monozygotic twins did, they still felt closer than did the unrelated lookalikes, which makes sense because, after all, these are full siblings. And they did change over time. With familiarity, they did not feel very familiar in the beginning, but over time, they did. So we get a very, very different picture when you look at people who just look alike, who are unrelated. So this raises some interesting questions in our minds. MZA twins form close social ties, so why not unrelated lookalikes? And I believe that it's because of their genetic relatedness. And I believe that it's the perception of similarity in the other individual that triggers these feelings of closeness or connectedness, that you and I are one, that we share. And this is a nice illustration of Hamilton's idea about altruism and cooperation being a function of genetic relatedness, at least in part. But then you have to ask yourself the question, does knowledge of twinship make a difference here? After all, when these twins are reunited, they know that they're twins, right? They know they're twins. So maybe that knowledge is what drives the closeness and the familiarity. But I'm going to argue that that's not the case. I can only argue through some interesting examples, but I think they're persuasive enough. Okay, so let's look at the first one, twins switched at birth. These would be twins who were born the same day as a single child, and somewhere in that hospital, for unknown reasons, one twin gets exchanged with a single child. So an unrelated pair goes home with the mother, and the single twin goes home with another mother. Okay? So there was a case that I studied that I've written about that happened in Canada, where this happened, and the two twins who were raised apart met for the first time when they were 20. And they were brought together by somebody who knew one and noticed the resemblance in the other one. And they thought, well, that's great. We look alike. We share interests. We're going to be friends. And they were friends for a year, before they began to talk about their backgrounds and where they were born. And they suddenly thought, maybe we are twins. Because, see, their birthdays were 5 days apart because the one who was switched took the other one's birthday, right? Took the birthday of the single child. So they were friends for a year without any knowledge of twinship, right? So there's one example of how knowledge of twinship may not make a difference. Okay, then we have some cases of dizygotic opposite-sex marriages where male-female twins raised apart meet one another without knowing they're twins. They fall in love and they marry. and they have children. And the children will often have the genetic anomalies because the parents carry one copy of a detrimental recessive gene, which have a 25% chance of coming together in the children. And so they go and they have medical exams done. And in the course of this, they learn that they are twins. Now, they're not very happy about it, obviously, and some couples will separate and some will not. But the point being here in the context of this discussion is that they had no knowledge of twinship, and yet they were drawn together. And one of the couples described what they called a fierce love. Half-sib reunions. In the literature, and I would say not the professional literature, but in the media, there are a number of cases of not just half-siblings, but full siblings who meet at work or vacations or whatever, and they form relations with one another. They become friends. And it's only over time that they realize that they have a family connection. There's a wonderful little piece done by one of our news shows in Los Angeles of a pair of brothers who were adopted apart, and they were assigned to drive a truck together. And they became friends, and in the course of this, maybe a month or so after driving this truck, they realized that, there's a lot of similarities here in terms of things, and they began to investigate, and it turned out they were full brothers. So there's another examples of people drawn together who do not know they're related. And then there's a wonderful case in James Shields' study of twins raised apart in England. This was done in 1962 with 44 sets of monozygotic twins raised apart. He had a young pair of twins who were about 8. These little girls had been adopted by different families who lived fairly near to each other. And when the little girls were 5, they began to play together and really liked each other, but didn't know what twins were, didn't know they were related. And the parents discouraged them from being twins, discouraged their relationship. But they went to school together, and they would sit together, and their teachers said they liked to do things together, even though the parents discouraged it. And again, these little girls didn't know they were twins, had no knowledge of it. So it was their perception of their similarity did, I think, underlie their attraction. So it's not the knowledge of twinship that explains the MZA relationships relative to the lack of relationship in the unrelated couples. So this raises the question, how do we know who our siblings are? All of us have siblings, and most of us do, and how do we know? Right? It seems like a question, of course we know, but how do we really know? So one reason, this is written about quite a bit by Cosmides and Tooby and Deborah Lieberman in Evolutionary Psychology, perinatal association with the mother. If you see your mother taking care of certain young children younger than you, it's fair to assume that they're your siblings. Length of co-residence. If you spend time in the same home, chances are these other kids are your siblings. And phenotypic matching. If you resemble one another, that may give you a clue as to whether or not you're related. But the point is that these unrelated lookalikes, rather monozygotic twins raised apart, do not have any perinatal association with the same mother, nor do they have a length of co-residence. And yet they're still drawn to one another. So I think that the genetic component, and again, the perception of similarity, it really is the more important driving force. And the second conclusion is that perceived physical resemblance does not sustain close social relations in the absence of perceived behavioral resemblance. Future directions for that study are continued study of these unrelated lookalikes, closer assessment of physical similarity and behavioral resemblance. And I also want to consider associations between perceptions of physical similarity and the measured behavioral resemblance and social relatedness. Okay, the last study I want to talk about See, Emma gave me a lot of time for this talk. You gave me till 12:15, Emma. So I'm going to, well, we're almost there. Okay, last study. This is a project I've done recently with a colleague in England, Satoshi Kanazawa. And the study is called Same-Sex Twins Are Taller and Heavier Than Opposite-Sex Twins, but Only If Breastfed, as Possible Evidence for Sex Bias in Human Breast Milk. This will be very important for you parents out there who have male-female twins. So there is some evidence of sex-biased milk production among non-human and human mothers, in macaques and in Kenyan mothers among them. There are some other studies that show this as well. So of course this raises implications for mothers, human mothers of male-female twins, because perhaps if they're adjusting the milk based on the sex of the child, if mothers do that for single children, then in the case of male-female twins, one or both children are going to get shortchanged when it comes to nutrition. So we used twins from the AdHealth study, the National Longitudinal Study of Adolescent Health, which is a very large database available to researchers that includes over 20,000 adolescents assessed at various points in time. Mothers are asked for how long was your child breastfed. And there were 285 breastfed twins and 469 never breastfed. So of course, we used both to see if there were differences. For zygosity, we used parental inquiry, which is a method I despise, and I would not have done the study otherwise, except that there was DNA confirmation for a substantial subsample that showed very, very good agreement with parental inquiry. So what we found was that breastfed same-sex DZ twins were significantly taller and heavier than were the breastfed opposite-sex twins at all 5 times of measurement. So that suggests that perhaps mothers are shortchanging these twins. We found that length of breastfeeding was not significant. So implications are that further study of breast milk quality should be done for mothers of males, mothers of females, and mothers of opposite-sex twins. Very, very important. I'm just going to run through very briefly the studies done at the University of Sao Paulo. I am impressed when Emma sent me this list of how much is going on here. Twin panels on maintenance, enlargement, and analysis of registered twins, twinning rates in Brazil, twinning rates in public and private hospitals, similarities and differences between twins, subjective proximity of twins along the life cycle, attachment styles that involve many researchers, collaborations around the country, many students are involved. And that was only the first page. Professional choice and satisfaction with life, separation of twins at school, very, very important topic, olfactory awareness, and zygosity determination. Very, very impressive, very, very active. I am going to be giving some other lectures in Brazil, which again is testimony to the interest in twins in this country. From here, I go to Belo Horizonte, and then to Salvador with Nara, and then to Rio de Janeiro, I'm learning. And with that, I'm going to end and just say thank you and obrigada.
Time for questions.
Well, first, congratulations and thanks for the lecture. Very, very interesting. I was listening to you and I kept thinking about this. we are always, when we study twins, usually we are concerned with the similarities between them. And even in your transgender study case, you pointed the similarities and how both are transgender and how that gives us clues that transgender are somehow DNA related or genetic related. But the outcomes were very different for both of them. One seems very happy with her condition and everything, and the other one committed suicide. And I kept thinking how, when we study these similarities, how different the environment really is. Is there any study with strong differences, like one twin in a very poor environment and another one in a rich environment, or something like that? Maybe a social study more than a psychology one. I kept thinking about
so you're talking about twins raised apart?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the vast majority of reared apart twins have been in different places, but within the middle class, not impoverished, right? But there have been a couple of cases in very, very extreme environments, okay? I'm studying now two sets of twins who were switched at birth, such that the twins in one pair were raised in a middle-class home, went to college, had benefits of good rearing, and the other raised in a very isolated area in Colombia, South America, okay, where it was an isolated farm village and did not go beyond the 5th grade, okay? And what I'm finding are similarities in the personality, in temperament, in how outgoing they are, but in their accomplishments intellectually, you can see that the lack of education that the one twin had makes a big difference, okay? So the environment clearly plays a role. When we look at reared apart twins who are not raised in dramatically different places, we do find that the twin that had the better education does do better in general intelligence tests than the other one. And some people have interpreted that as meaning the environment makes the biggest difference. But when you look at those twins, the correlation across the group, they still are much more alike than are the fraternal twins. So the genetics plays a role too. So they both play a role. But your question initially about twins raised in dramatically different environments, we need more cases like that. And I'm not advocating for separating twins at all, but if we find those cases, those are the ones that will give us, I think, the greatest information. Now, Emma mentioned early on in her talk about Jack and Oscar, the pair raised in Trinidad, Jewish with his father, and Oscar raised Catholic in Nazi Germany with his mother and grandmother. And that's a very extreme difference there. But I will say that despite those differences, those twins were remarkably alike in their personalities, in their general intelligence, in their outlook, in their habits and mannerisms. In their mannerisms, both twins used to sneeze loudly in elevators for fun, and they used to put rubber bands around their wrists, and they used to read books back and forth, back to front, and they used to wash their hands before and after using the bathroom. So their big difference, of course, was in their political and historical interpretations and understanding of events. So I think that even in extreme environments, you're going to get similarities in some areas, differences in other areas. And it depends on the trait, depends on the extreme of the environment.
Thank you, Nancy. Congratulations. I have a question about the study of people that are similar and twins, unrelated and related. And the first question is, what do you think about the role of social ideals on that? Because your hypothesis is that the twins know they are twins, but that it's not, that doesn't make a real difference on the data, on your data, because of these 2 or 3 examples of twins that didn't know they were twins. No, but they didn't know they were twins, but they were very, very similar. Mm-hmm. So, and they lived in the same neighborhood, or they studied in the same school. That's a thing that makes, it's a kind of mystery that can improve your curiosity, for instance. And so I think that we have the ideal, social ideal, that brothers are brothers. And we have the same blood, and that makes us closer, because we have brotherhood. We have the same blood. But there are studies in philosophy that try to think about friendship, not linked to brotherhood or to blood related, broadly related. So I'm afraid that if we say, or if we can if you can say, we can say that our DNA, our gene, or the similarity of our genetic sorry? No, the similarity of our genes makes us closer, or the similarity of our face, for instance, that this kind of studies can bring to some kind of segregation. I'm thinking racial differences will apart us, and racial similarities will make us closer. For instance, why the question? Because it's very interesting, the example that Emma showed about the 2 brothers. One was Jew and the other one was a Nazi. And they were equal. They were similar. So the question is, if you and your group are thinking about this kind of problem linked to affinities, linked to similarities and not to differences, because that's what Vinicius said. The studies of twins marks the similarities, and what about the differences? Then if we can say, to resume, if we can say that we are closer to people that has the same genetic carga genética, Emma, help me. The same genetic shape, I don't know, the same genetic baggage, we can justificate segregation.
Well, I don't think that any of the research here is necessarily going to create segregation. I think that we're looking only at individual differences here. We're not looking at between group differences. I mean, people can misuse the information any way they want, but that's not what I'm looking at. I'm just looking at within individual differences, and I'm just trying to interpret what the data show me. I understand what you mean by this idea of social ideals, that we think of a brother as a brother or sister as a sister, family members. But these unrelated lookalikes, look so much alike, and so, but yet they have no personality similarity at all, and they don't form close social relationships. And many people have this social idea that similarities of appearance will draw you together, and yet the data don't show that whatsoever. I do think that, if you could think about twin as being a category, right, a social ideal, without any reference to identical or fraternal, let's say. Some people just talk about twins. But then, if you look at the differences between identical and fraternal in their similarities and in their social affinities, you do see differences. You see strong differences, really. And so, you need to explain them, and why is that? Also, just because people may know their brothers or know their sisters doesn't mean they're going to be close or get along or be similar. I know, and I'm sure you know too, siblings who do not get along at all. And why is that? Why is that? Is it because they're competing for resources, or is it because they just are very dissimilar? Maybe their genetic differences are driving that. I'm not making any value judgments here. I'm just trying to explain what the situation is.
Well, I want to know if there are some studies about the impact of a death of one of the twins on another.
Do I have such a study?
Yes.
Yes, I do. I have such a study, and I now have over 700 individual twins, what we call twinless twins, in that study. And the study came about because when I was at the University of Minnesota, I began getting contacts from twins who were bereaved, and they were not feeling better, and they were not feeling like anybody understood the loss. So I began to gather questionnaire data from them with actually several points in mind. One, the practical one, to understand what the experience was, but also to test out some evolutionary concepts. The idea that identical twins might feel greater grief than fraternal twins, which would mirror, what you see in twin relationships. So that was another question I was looking at. How did identical loss compare to fraternal loss? And what I find is that the identical twins do have a somewhat more severe loss than the fraternals on a grief intensity scale. It's not a very large effect size. It's rather small, but it's significant. I also find that it's mostly females who are in the study, because females tend to volunteer for research more. And in the practical groups I've done with twins, I find the twins feel that no one understands the loss except for other twins. And fortunately, there is a group called Twinless Twins International, where twins meet. These individual twins meet, and they can have discussions with one another. In the US, there's a national group like this, and there's local groups as well. But I think it's a very important problem for a number of reasons, because it lets us understand in a theoretical sense different bereavement in a family. I've done some legal cases too, where a twin dies from medical malpractice or an accident or an injury. And the lawyers want to better understand the loss here. And what that means for me is to interview different family members to get a sense of their reaction. And the reactions are very different on the part of parents and non-twin siblings and maybe an aunt and uncle. I should mention too that in my twin loss study, I not only have the twins rate the degree of grief they feel to the twin, but also to any other relative who died in their lifetime. Did they lose a mother, a father, a non-twin sibling, an aunt or an uncle or grandparent? And what I find is that the loss of the twin is the strongest loss. Mother and father are high, siblings are a little lower, aunts and uncles, so it all follows, the genetic relatedness. There are two exceptions, right? One exception is spouses. There's a small number of twins who've lost a spouse, and their loss is as similar as the twin, okay? And maybe, I'm trying to think of reasons for that. In an evolutionary context, maybe it's that your spouse is your source of reproductive potential, which you're now denied. The other kinship I cannot compare is the loss of a child. And I'm glad, because I don't want twins to lose children. But that would be an informative one genetically, because identical twins share 100% of their genes with their co-twin, but only half with their child. So you see, in a theoretical sense, that would be a very interesting comparison, but it's one that I'm glad I can't do.
Congratulations for your presentation first.
Obrigada.
And I'd like to know, I am a speech therapist in Campinas, near here, and I'd like to know if in one of your studies, if you research or study something about the language development of Mz twins. All my studies are on that point about language development in these cases, and I'd like to know if you found something about delay or if it's in time. Okay.
Sure, yeah. I have not studied language development myself, but many, many people in my field have. And I talk about this quite a bit in the book Twin Misconceptions, because twins on average, particularly identical twins, do have a language delay. They have the language delay mostly because, not prematurity, which is what people, but it's because they are so close together with one another that they often will develop their own pattern of speech, not just verbal, but also a pattern of nonverbal gestures. And a lot of times they communicate just with each other and not so much with other children. But also parents, it's interesting, the amount of speech directed toward twins is more than parents direct toward single children, but each individual twin gets less interaction with a parent than a single child. And parents are more controlling of the situation because it's more chaotic. So twins do tend to lag behind non-twins in language development. There's a very rich literature on this done by some women in England, very, very good literature, where they categorize speech that the twins use just with each other, and that sometimes they use with other kids. A mother told me a fascinating thing on this point, that while the parents themselves could not understand the children, the older siblings could, and they would act as translators. And I often felt that if researchers were clever, they could enlist these older siblings as assistants in understanding the development of this language.
I have two questions. Yeah. The first one is related to the question that he asked you. It's about the voice, not the language, but the difference in terms of voice between twins.
Yeah. So there have not been a lot of studies done on that. And the differences between identical twins and similarity and fraternal twins is not as strong as we would think. It's just, it's surprising. It's one of those areas where it's just not as strong as we would think. But again, there have not been a lot of studies on this.
And I think in this case, the environment play a bigger role than the genetic factor.
Are you talking about with respect to voice?
Yes.
Okay, this is a topic I'm not that familiar with, so I will be fascinated to hear your comments.
Okay, and in the second one, I just in the beginning of your presentation, you said about the 20 rate of Benin.
Yes.
The high.
Yes.
I want to know which factors explain the 20 rate by itself. Which factors involved to this rating?
Well, African populations tend to have the highest twinning rates around the world. Nigeria and Benin, very, very high. And they suspect that it is a genetic component, and that what it translates into are hormonal factors in the females. It tends to be on the twinning line, on the maternal line.
In Brazil, there's a place called
I know.
Cangodói.
Yeah.
I don't know the twinning rate, but it's the higher in Brazil.
Yes, yes. Yes, that's a very famous place, by the way. The first time I came here, I told Emma I wanted to go, but Emma said it's too far. I didn't realize. Okay, obrigada, obrigada.
Eu queria dizer que a Nancy trouxe alguns folhetos, não tem para todo mundo, então eu vou deixar aqui para quem estiver interessado, que contando um pouco o que fala esse novo, o que trata esse novo livro que ela publicou agora. Então aqui fala os nomes dos capítulos, então quem tiver interesse está aqui em cima da mesa, tá bom?